few days, a new Washington rule is going into effect, changing the way people can identify their sex on their birth certificates. Here to explain why is Washington's Secretary of Health, John Wiesman. It's good to have you here.
No,
Thanks for doing this. So what exactly is this new rule change all about?
Right. Well, thanks for having us on the program to talk about it,
Happy
first of
to.
all. So we at the Department of Health have responsibility for registering births and maintaining birth certificates. For about 10 years now, we've had and allowed people to change the gender or the sex on the birth certificate from male to female and female to male. About a year ago, we had some individuals approach us and saying, look, we don't identify as either male or female as gender. That's not our gender identity, and we would like to have a third option. So we decided that that was something we should pursue, and we opened up a public rulemaking process to consider that. And so we did that, and through the rulemaking process, we've decided to add an X option to cover gender identity for folks who don't identify as male or female.
So this is something that people would go back and change their birth certificate to, or is it available to parents to leave that open when their child is born?
Yeah, so this is only going to be, it's not going to be available at the time of birth.
Okay.
At time of birth, the healthcare provider determines based on the biological sex if male or female, and we'll put that on the birth certificate. So this is really something that happens after people really identify their gender identity.
Got it.
So,
do they have to be a certain age to come in and change this?
They don't. So there are sort of two processes. Certainly for adults, you can change your gender identity by downloading a form on our website, www.doh.wa.gov.
And I'm sure you've got that all written down. We'll put that on the website for everybody.
They can download the form and fill out the form and then have it notarized. So the signature has to be witnessed to change your gender. And again, you can change it to male, female, or this new X option. For minors, minors require a parental consent and then an attestation or a confirmation from a healthcare provider. So it could be a physician, a social worker, a psychiatrist, psychologist who confirms that that's the child's gender identity.
And so having your birth certificate have this option and being able to change it if you feel is necessary is important to people for what reasons? What did they tell you?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people experience sort of discrimination, harassment. If you think about taking a birth certificate, for example, maybe you're applying for a job and you need to have your birth certificate, and they look at this and say, well, this doesn't seem really to match up. I mean, they can actually be denied probably employment from that, maybe not legally, but those are the kinds of sort of discriminations that people with other gender identities experience.
Or even if they're embarrassed and this is not really anybody's business but your own kind of thing.
So this really, we think, is really a health issue about helping them live their authentic lives and say that, yes, you're a full part of society and supporting them being healthy human beings.
So what is the difference between sex and gender as we talk about these things?
Well, in Washington law, the law against discrimination really says that sex and gender are the same when it comes to Washington law. Gender identity is an identity that you develop as you age and sort of understand. There's social norms have changed a great deal along these days, Margaret, around this, and our understanding of gender identity has as well. And so we really want people to have, if they choose, this option on the birth certificate.
Are other states doing this? Are we kind of at the forefront?
Well, we are one of the leaders. So Oregon did so starting January 1st. So they beat us by about a month to making this happen. And then California will be doing this as well starting September 1st.
Now, you mentioned that minors have to have parental consent. And sometimes that can be a tricky thing. Sometimes minors want to do something that parents aren't on board with, even though they know their own mind. Why did the law decide to have parental consent? And I'm not stating an opinion about this, I'm just asking you what the reasoning is.
Yeah, so for any changes on birth certificates for minors requires parental consent. So it's just sort of how the process works. And again, it's important to also have that healthcare provider attestation as well.
And we're talking about minors under the age of 18.
Right.
So during the period of time that you have public comment on this, did you personally learn new things or have your mind opened a bit by the sort of testimony that you heard?
Yeah, I mean, people share their stories, right, about their gender identity, their history. All those things are really informative as we went through the process. We had over 1,000 public comments on this rulemaking change, and really found that people supported this in terms of a human rights issue, and again, also concerned about people being discriminated against. We also had some folks who, expressed concerns about this. People who felt like a birth certificate is something that shouldn't be changed at all. People who felt like the sex on the birth certificate should be the biological sex. And then people who, felt like sex and gender shouldn't be intertwined. But I mean, I think as we look at ourselves as we live our life, they're very intertwined and they're part of our gender identity.
These are tough decisions that you guys have to make. That's very interesting. Thank you for explaining this. Is this in effect now?
So the rule goes into effect on Saturday, and you can,
okay.
and we'll start processing forms on Monday. But folks can download the form right now online and even get it notarized and sent in if you want, and we'll process them on Monday.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for keeping us all healthy in
Appreciate
the
it.
state as
Yes.
best we can. Our medical experts come back to answer your questions right after this break.